My name is Jerome Ferry. My cameraman is Alan Eggers. We're doing a video interview with John D. Nyquist, an early Collins Radio employee, retiring as Vice President of the Cedar Rapids Division. John, tell us when you were born and where you were born.
Well, I was born in Peoria, Illinois on May 28, 1918.
What was your folks' name?
My dad's name was Eliad Nyquist, and my mother's name was Linnea, both Swedish names.
Did you have any brothers and sisters?
No, I'm the only child.
You're the only child. And what was your dad's occupation?
He was a builder, household builder.
A contractor or a carpenter?
Some of each. I knew him best, of course, when I was during the Depression, and you did what you could those days. But he kept busy.
Was he a fun type guy? Did you get to enjoy some good times together?
Dad was a fisherman, and the little boys and big boys rowed the boat. He didn't fish, he rowed the boat. So I did a lot of rowing in my day.
So what did you do growing up? Were you reared in Peoria?
No, I was reared in Rockford, Illinois.
Rockford. And what did you do as a youngster? Did you have paper routes or anything?
Yes, I had a morning paper route. I got up at 3 o'clock in the morning and carried papers. And I also had an evening paper route.
Is that where you went to high school? Was in
Yes.
Rockford?
Mm-hmm.
When you got out of high school, did you have any idea what you wanted to do with your life?
Well, yes, I worked during high school off hours in a grocery store and so forth, and I didn't want to do that. And my dad was interested in air conditioning. And at the time, it was just the beginning of the whole business of air conditioning homes. And there was a professor at the University of Illinois by the name of Bud Conzo, who was the leading developer of home air conditioning in the United States. And it was suggested that I might want to look into that. It was fine, but I didn't have any money, and Dad didn't have much to spend on going to college. So I worked for a year at a place in Rockford called the W.F. and John Barnes Machine Shop, and saved some money, and I'll never forget it. Dad left me off down at Champaign one day, and I had $500 in my checking account, and I worked my way through the university and ended up with $25. 4 years later.
Did you?
We had fun.
Were you into sports in college? Or?
None.
So you graduated from the University of Illinois.
Yes.
As what?
Mechanical engineering.
Mechanical engineering.
With emphasis on air conditioning.
Mm-hmm. What year was that?
1941.
And then, did you start looking at the want ads or?
No, at that time, and I think it still goes on, companies would come to the university and interview students who had signed up that they would be interested in that particular company. And I signed up for the Collins Company and never heard of them, except I had a roommate who was an excellent student and had interviewed Collins, and they didn't hire him. And I signed up, and I got a job with them. Now, my roommate was an electrical engineer, subsequently hired by a communications company in Chicago. Ended up being their chief engineer.
Who interviewed you?
L. Morgan Craft.
Morgan Craft. And what did they want to know? Like what kind of questions did they ask you? Let me put it that way.
Well, he wanted to know what my interests were and what my grades were, of course. And he was interested in my experience working working in that machine shop for a year and so forth. And the next thing I knew, I had an offer. I had 2 other offers, but I chose the Collins Company. Why, I'm not sure.
Oh, you're not really sure. Who was the other 2 companies, you remember?
Bendix in California, and a fellow down in southern Illinois that made appliances for Sears.
How old were you when you hired on at Collins?
Well, I hired on in 41, so I was 23.
I have a big gray, that name, does that ring a bell?
He was the fellow who seriously wanted a job with Collins and didn't get it.
Okay. Whatever happened to him?
Yes, he went to Chicago and worked for a company there and ended up being their chief engineer of Raytheon. Now, I think the reason Morgan Kraft didn't hire Dick is because he was from Chicago. And our experience, and that of many companies, is that a kid from Chicago goes back to Chicago sooner or later. And we were hiring the kids to stay there.
So what was your first job when you come to Collins Radio? What did they assign you to?
Well, I walked into the front door with Bob Cox, and we introduced ourselves, and Bob was sent to talk to Arthur, and I was sent to Morgan Kraft. This was about 8 o'clock in the morning. And after the general discussion, Morgan asked if I had machine shop experience, and I told him what I had done. And Morgan said, well, John, at the moment we need parts worse than we need engineers. Would you mind going to work in the model shop on the machinery? I said, no. So I went home and changed clothes, put on my blue jeans and a shirt and went to work in the model shop. And by lunch I was running the lathe.
When Collins hired people like that with a college education, engineering degrees, didn't they more or less try to start them off in the shop or in the factory and work up through?
Yes. The double E's all work in the test department, and there was 3 MEs all lined up: Mike Fitzgerald from Purdue, and Ross Pyle from Rose Polytech over in Indiana.
So you went to work in the model shop.
Yes, sir.
What was it? Do you have any idea what the equipment was you were working on? What type of radio it was being used for?
No, all I had was they kept sending me drawings, and I could make them on a lathe. And the foreman at that time was a mechanical engineer that had been from Illinois a couple of years previous.
How many machinists do you suppose there was in the model shop when you started?
Oh, 12.
The war hadn't started yet, had it?
Yes, that's right.
You started in June. How about women? Was there any women working in the model shop at that
No
time?
women in the factory.
Yeah.
The only girl in the factory was in the factory office. Otherwise, we were 100% men, including all assembly work.
Mm-hmm. When you, of course, you had one of your main things was reading mechanical drawings.
Sure.
Was this something that you had learned in school, or was this something you had to learn to read the Collins mechanical drawings?
Well, mechanical engineering, we were exposed quite a bit to reading drawings. But Rockford, Illinois is a machine tool center. I learned to read mechanical drawings in junior high school, senior high school, as I worked as a machinist there for a year, and again at the university. I could read the prints.
This is jumping ahead a little bit, but it's an appropriate time to mention it. Later, quite a few years later, we're in the process of converting over to the metric system. Did that ever pan out?
I never did see a metric drawing.
Well, this was quite a bit after your time
Must
that
have
they were
been.
going to go to the metric system. And I think it was probably a military requirement, but as far as people thinking metric and using metric 100%, I don't think it ever got off the ground.
Well, that'd be quite a change. Every machine tool you got is obsolete.
Yeah.
Boy.
So you were working in the model shop, and then how long was it before you seen the promotion?
3 months.
And at that time, they made you...
I was the foreman. And the fellows who'd been there a long time were not completely impressed about having this kid out of college.
I was going to ask you that.
But we got along sooner or later, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Once they found out that you knew what you were talking about, they had respect for you.
Well, the fact that of the three engineers, I was the best machinist they had there. And of course, we had folks a lot better qualified than I was. But it was explained by the management that these are young engineers we're putting through a training program. And one of the things we want to know is that, can he work with people? And the group accepted that.
So you had the model shop. Now the model shop was the one that made the first parts for a new design. You made the tooling, and then you made the first parts, and this would have been separate from the machine shop itself, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In fact, it was a part of the engineering department.
Then the machine shop, they're the ones that actually started tooling up to make for production.
They built production.
Yeah. Who was in charge of the machine shop at that?
John Dayhoff.
Well, with John being head of the machine shop and you being the foreman in the model shop, you probably had quite a close working relationship with each other, didn't you, as far as new parts hitting the...
Oh, sure. But one of the things that I can remember about Dayhoff is that I was told that we were going to have to expand, and talked to John Dayhoff, and he has some people that may be of help to you, because he couldn't hire anybody out the door. So I went to Mr. Dayhoff one afternoon and told him I was going to need another man on the milling machines. And he didn't greet that with much enthusiasm. In fact, he told me where to go and how to get there.
He wasn't about to give up good help.
Well, he had to understand John Dayhoff. And, well, I told him I'd appreciate his help, and I went back to work. And in about 2 days, he stopped by and said, Nyquist, I've been talking to the foreman out in the machine shop, and the best guy we've got on milling machines is so-and-so. And whenever you're ready to take him, just give me the word and we'll send him over. And we were long friends way into retirement, John Dayhoff and I.
What do you suppose changed his mind? He got to thinking he was getting in the way of somebody getting a better job, or?
No, I don't think so.
Or do you think he got a little pressure from up above?
I don't think he got any pressure from up above. I think Slim really understood the business. And he knew, wouldn't admit that to me, that in order to get radios he could build, we had to be able to make the models. And over the years, we got a lot of people out of it. And it was a promotion for them.
Yes, it was. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and they were good people.
And a great place to draw from, too, experience.
Oh, yeah, sure, yeah.
When you, around the time you made foreman, that would have been around September, in August, September, in there sometime. Was there any inkling as to what was on the international front as far as war, rumors of war, or anything?
We were all 1A in the draft.
Yeah, but did people talk about it? Or was this,
Yeah, I remember discussions about it, but of course the war had its own start there that started the whole business going.
there was no gearing up prior to December?
We were in development, and that development program, the Collins Company, this is before my time, had received a contract for its invention, if you will, the ART-13. And that's the parts we were building in the model shop at that time for the first preliminary models.
Do you recall what the ART-13, how did the military use it?
Oh yes, it was used in aviation for communication purposes. It's my understanding that prior to that, the HF radios only had 4 channels. And everybody could listen to it. And this radio had either 10 or 12 channels, and each of those could be changed. So we cut them off on communications.
And this was a transmitter and a receiver both?
Just a transmitter.
Just a transmitter.
As far as I remember.
In December of '41, when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, isn't this about the same time you moved into the new main plant building?
We moved in for Christmas.
Prior to this, I guess I forgot to ask you, where was your place of employment located, Collins Radio, at that time?
Well, I was down on First Avenue, right across from where Walgreens is now, I guess. It was the factory back in there, off of First Avenue.
Around 29th Street?
Yeah,
someplace.
it was around in there.
What was your clock number?
1004.
1004. So when you moved into the new main plant, this was at one time a very low or swamp-like spot. Did they have a parking lot at that time, or? I'm sure it wasn't blacktop. But.
We had a parking lot where it is today. It was mud, and it rained. It just poured down rain. We had water going off the parking lot in the factory door, and we opened the door on the other side to get it out.
30 years later, they had the same problem.
Did they?
Yes, they did. They had 4 inches of water across the entire floor of the main plant during one summer.
Well, they built a lot of radios in the meantime.
How about the cafeteria? Was there a cafeteria up and running at the time you moved in? Or?
No. We had a bus that took us down on First Avenue to a place called Mary Ann's. And that's where we had an opportunity for lunch. But I brought my lunch most of the time.
How many employees do you suppose there was in the main plant building at the time, in the December time frame, approximately? Thousands?
Oh, no. When we moved in? Oh, no. It was 400. I would guess 500 or 600, 700 maybe in that area.
When you started down at First Avenue, did they have security guards at that time?
No.
Did they have badges?
I don't remember. I think so, but I'm not sure. We had a girl sitting at the front door who knew everybody.
Receptionist?
Reception type, yeah.
Yeah. Could the wives come in to the factory at First Avenue?
I don't think so. I didn't have one, so I don't know. I don't think so. It was kind of an out-of-the-way place down there.
So when the attack on Pearl Harbor, is that when they probably brought the guards on the scene?
Immediately. Immediately.
And that they probably also carried guns at that
Yes,
time?
sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Did you notice any increase in security outside or around the perimeter of the building?
Oh, yes, yes. we had to be identified as we come in, and these guards from the military, they just marched around the outside with their rifle over their shoulder. No nonsense.
So what was your next promotion, John?
Well, they started a trend at that time with engineering. And the next thing I got involved with, they added to the model shop, was lab assistants. And these were the men who worked up in the laboratory from assembly to put the factory product, put it together, so forth, do all the work in that area.
So you were in charge of the lab assistants?
So I got in charge of the lab assistants.
Was drafting in that?
Drafting was next, and they called it engineering services. And before I got much older, the engineering services supplied all the services to the engineers that they needed to invent and build a product.
So how many people did you have working for you?
Oh, I don't remember, but we had a bunch. We had a big drafting room.
How old would you have been at this time?
Oh, probably 3-4 years later.
30, around 30 years old?
I suppose.
Collins Radio has always been known for its high level of quality. Is this something that come down from art? Or
You bet. His philosophy, and it, from my knowledge, it was spread throughout the company, and particularly the management, is our products had to be state of the art technically, and they had to be very, very reliable. And we hung on to that. Incidentally, I had an experience with that question here about a few months ago. My high school graduating class had a reunion. 60 years, I guess it was. Yeah, or more, 65. But one of the fellows who I no longer knew, because it was a big graduating class, had been a pilot in World War II. And as he explained what happened to him, he had made 200 and some flights from England to Germany, and bombing and so forth. And after the meeting, I went over and I said, "Did you ever use an ART-13 radio?" And he said it was the best product we've ever had. He said, "I flew those airplanes and never had a failure." And it was the first time I'd had a chance to talk to somebody who'd used it. Seriously. But that was our philosophy.
So, needless to say, these radios probably had quite a long lifetime compared to some of the products you buy today that it's kind of a throwaway society today, that back then they built it to last.
Well, we built it forever. We tried to and did. We built, I guess, 50,000 of them in Cedar Rapids, the ART-13s, and subcontractors built maybe twice that many.
So after you spent a stint in the engineering services, being in charge of the lab assistants and the draftsmen, what did you go on to next, John?
The next step was called operations. And that included everything but engineering, practically, and personnel. But it included everything it took to build a radio set.
Did it include the machine shop also?
Machine shop, assembly department, the test department, the whole whole 9 yards.
Was John Nyquist still there at that time, head of the machine shop at that time?
You mean John Dayoff?
John Dayoff.
Yes, he was there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At what time did you get to know Art Collins? You'd been here now probably 10 years. Did you ever get the chance to meet Art? Did he ever come around and introduce himself? Or
Oh, he'd come around. Arthur would quite often take a tour through the factory and so forth, and through the offices, and he'd stop and visit and wanted to know what was going on and so forth. But my philosophy was not to take the initiative. If I had a problem, I'd go solve it and not run to Art about it. And that was the way we behaved. I didn't get to really know him until I was made vice president of the Cedar Rapids division. And then we shared offices next to each other with a common secretary.
did his, excuse me, did his dad work at Collins or at the plant at this time?
I don't know if MH worked or not there, but he was there and had an office. He had a nice office up in the corner. And my exposure to him was interesting, to me anyhow. He was a pipe collector. And he'd bring these old dirty pipes down to me in the model shop and say, "Can you fix this and make it like new?" Yes, sir. And so I got to visit with the old gentleman. He was a gentleman, very distinguished guy.
During the war years, I imagine there was a great influx of new employees.
Tremendous.
Did they start hiring a lot of women at that time?
I'm fumbling for the time. I would think that in about 1942, when the war beginning was approaching us, the man who run most of the factory, a fellow by the name of Charlie Cruiser, come out in the factory and had a meeting, and he got everybody assembled. And he crawled up on top of a stool on top of a line table and said, "Look, we're about to hire women. And no, it's a change in policy, but we need them, and they can do the job. And I want you guys to behave like gentlemen." And he got off the stool and back to his office.
Was there any hooting at that time?
Not a peep. No. It was no surprise to us. We knew we were expanding, and they were drafting the boys and the men. And we got along fine.
So at about the same time, the women started probably getting jobs in the machine shop.
We had a school, because we had to teach the girls how to read drawings and what the products were. And personnel run that thing, but I would think that over the time, they may still have a school, I don't know, but it took about maybe 6 weeks of education for these gals before we could put them on the lines. And they performed fine. We had no problem with the women.
During the war years, I imagine quite a few of the employees had to drive to and from work. Was that any problem getting gas with the gas rationing?
Well, we got some consideration on the rationing, but you just didn't use your car a lot. I didn't have a problem with that. No place to go anyhow.
Except to and from work.
Yeah, to and from work.
Was there 3 shifts in a lot of the areas of
Yes.
during the war years?
You bet. And we had a stub shift once that was 4 hours, and that was for housewives who could come to work when their husband got home from work. And that worked fine. Mm-hmm. But Collins Radio and Cedar Rapids was just not big enough to support a manufacturing facility that could build all the requirements that we created.
At this time, did Collins have medical insurance for the employees? Do you remember?
I don't remember. I know we didn't have it beforehand, but
Was there such a thing as a pension at that time?
I don't think so. Mm-mm. But as we grew, the personnel department had to add those kinds of things in order to attract people. It's just a competitive item.
So when the war ended in 1945, what happened at Collins Radio?
Well, it was an interesting experience. I got called into Mr. Collins' office, and he had a stack of telegrams, maybe 6-7 inches high, cancellations. And they had canceled every contract we had, as far as I could tell, particularly the production ones. And he wanted to know what people thought about that. And I was asked, and I said, we got to go to work. And we did. And in a day or two, Arthur moved out of his office and had a drafting board put up out in the factory. And he started to design by himself a new amateur product. And I had the model shop working, and he wanted the parts back every morning that he submitted the previous day. And I remember getting that lecture, and I said, Art, I can't do it on all of them because some of them take more labor than that. I said, you guys designed that big casting, and I got to go get a casting made and God knows what. Well, he understood. But then he careful on his design to use parts we had in inventory in his structure that I could build. And I believe we had a working radio in about 10 days.
You had a complete retooling almost as far as the machine shop was concerned.
Well, not. We had some high production tools, but we had the experience and the equipment to make models and short runs and so forth.
Was there a big layoff at the end of the war?
Quite a layoff, yes. Not in the engineering department, because we kept them laying awake nights working on new products.
Were you building any commercial radio products?
During the war?
No, I mean after the war, when
Oh,
you started
yeah.
getting into the
Oh,
amateur.
yeah, sure, you bet.
Because I know there's Collins FM transmitters still out at WMT.
Yeah, sure, yeah, it was part of our product line. We worked on that, and they reinstated some orders, the military did. But we went to work at a lower scale and harder.
Yeah. So what was your next promotion, John?
Well, I worked running the factory and the operations end of it in parallel with Bob Cox, who run engineering at that time. And my next and final change was to take over the Cedar Rapids division.
Was it at this time that Art and Bob Cox went to Dallas?
Well, Art was down there beforehand, but he was in and out. He had come up, his family lived here at the time, but he spent a lot of time trying to get the Dallas thing going. And we didn't talk about it, but it was my feeling that he felt he had to go down and do it himself.
Why was he so adamant about starting plant in Dallas, Texas?
Well, we didn't believe that we could attract technical people. You know, the amount and the quality that we wanted and had to have to Cedar Rapids, Iowa.
Out in the cornfield.
Well, yeah, and some of the finest engineering schools, of course, were in the east, in the far west, and down in Texas had good engineering schools. And you talk to a guy from California about coming to work in Iowa, and it just didn't register. And the same thing went on and we never did try to penetrate the eastern market. But we did in Dallas. We had some fine people there, yeah.
So, Mr. Cox at the Dallas division, and you become senior vice president of the director of operations of the.
Well, Cox went on Arthur's technical staff in Dallas. And I stayed up here running this factory, as I call the whole operation.
Apollo. Some experiences with the Apollo program?
Well, I had some experiences with Collins. I helped a little bit on the bidding process on that thing. And it looked like a very interesting job and something we could do. When we got the job, it took a lot of effort and a lot of engineering talent. I was told, and hard for me to believe, but at one time we had as many as 300 engineers on that job. It went through several changes in management as to who was in charge of that thing. A fellow by the name of Art Wolfsburg ended up most of the time, and I was asked to work with Art quite closely at that time, even though it was somebody else's department. Arthur didn't want Cox involved all the time, so they picked on me. So I worked with him to quite an extent, and had quite a bit of responsibility for it. I got to entertain and work with all of the visitors, and we had visitors from NASA all the time, and they were excellent people, excellent people. We got along fine.
Was there ever any doubt as to whether Collins could pull this off? That was quite a feat at that time.
Not in our mind. I don't know about the customer, but we felt we could do it, and did it.
Yeah.
In fact, we got the thing. Well, after a year or two, they changed the whole design philosophy on Apollo, so we had to start over again. And we had changes on how you do it and the whole bit. But we did it on time, and we did it under budget. And it played. Never, to my knowledge, they never had a failure of a Collins product in use.
John, I noticed you have a memento there of different stamps of the Apollo program. Can you tell us about those?
Well, I can tell you about some of them. There are others that happened before I was there. I think the first one is on the bird expedition years and years ago. That happened before I was with the company. And then there's one here on the airmail, and so on and so forth. And then we had to have a stamps here of the Apollo program. And I have to look at this bottom one. And that was a project Mercury, and there's also a stamp here on amateur radio. And we felt we were in the leadership position on all of those communication areas.
John, did we have any competitors on the Apollo program, or were we the sole source for
Oh no, we had competitors. We had competitors.
Who was the prime?
I
You
think
remember?
Raytheon was one of them. And I'm not sure. No, I think Raytheon was one of them.
You had mentioned the bird exposition. When you was growing up in Rockford, were you aware of the bird exposition?
Not really. Not really.
So you didn't hear anything about the young radio man from Cedar Rapids, Iowa?
No, no, didn't hear.
So the Apollo program was over with, and Collins Radio had a little downturn in the early 70s, 70 and 71.
Mm-hmm.
It was, it's been said that Art was a brilliant engineer, but his knowledge of the financial matters, he lacked a little bit in that. Would you think that was a true statement?
No. Number one, I think Arthur was a brilliant engineer and a real fine guy with a deep sense of thought. When I shared adjacent offices with Arthur, he frequently would come in and ask me to go to lunch with him. And I soon learned that I would be quiet. And if we were going to be any discussion at lunch, he would lead it. Most of the time, during lunch, he was continuing his thoughts before he'd come in and ask me, but he was hungry.
He was using you as a sounding board, perhaps?
He had, and this was my own supposition. If he went to lunch alone, he would be bothered. But if he had somebody with him, they wouldn't interrupt him. And particularly if the fellow was with him, didn't say anything, he could continue his trend of thought. That was my own interpretation of the thing. But this went on for, years.
What led to this downturn in business in the early 70s? Was it the lack of contracts? Or
Just a lack of orders.
lack of orders?
Sure. Mm-hmm. Sure. And everybody has that. I don't know. I guess there are some companies that had to continue with production and predict growth and so forth, but we were with the rest of them.
And what was it, more or less, the company was looking for financial help at this time, or were they looking possibly to merge with somebody, or what was the thought at that time?
Well, the thought was that Arthur was in Dallas and had been there for quite some time. And he felt that we needed to change our product offerings. We were strictly communications. And that we needed to go into a different electronic area to sustain the company's balance and growth. And he chose computers to do that. And we didn't have the strength or the resources to get into the computer business. Just was more than we could handle. In the meantime, Cedar Rapids was a productive, profitable operation.
Do you, so who was some of the people that were seriously looking at, or if any of other than Rockwell at this time?
I don't know. I was out of that circuit. That was fundamentally down in Dallas with Roothouse and Cox and Arthur. And I didn't know much about the Rockwell opportunity until they started to come up here and visit. And I spent quite a bit of time then. I was on the board of directors at that time, and I was selected by Arthur, I guess, to visit Rockwell and go to their factories and their engineering departments and look at their facilities, and was this a company that we could live with, was his comments. And I thought it was.
What would have happened if Rockwell decided not to buy Collins at that time?
I don't know. That was all handled down there with the folks in the accounting department and management in that area. I just don't know. I'm sure that we were a desirable company to pick up. But Rockwell, you see, this was a new area for Rockwell, and we were looking for a new area.
Did they, didn't Rockwell Collins, didn't they hire a gentleman to come in as a troubleshooter about this time period, a Mr. Wilson, was it?
Bob Wilson was a man I knew very well. I got acquainted with him. He was from Ford, and he spent a lot of time in Cedar Rapids, and he did his best to encourage me to stay. But in my situation with a heart problem, I decided that I had some orders from the doctors, and I was equipped and prepared to go do it, and I was going to do it, and I did. And Bob worked then, and we selected somebody else to run it. But shortly thereafter, Bob left Rockwell. And it was my understanding, again, that Bob Wilson thought that Rockwell should keep Collins as a separate company. And Mr. Rockwell thought it should stay, should be combined with the Rockwell Corporation. It was a difference of opinion, and Bob left. Good guy.
Dr. Lippisch, did you know Dr. Lippisch?
Alex, sure.
Yeah.
He monkeyed with airplanes. You heard his famous speech that wings are for the birds.
He had a laboratory or a testing facility in one of the Butler buildings, didn't he? Down at
Yes, and he worked a lot at the airport. He worked a lot at the airport. And he had a distinguished career in Germany, of course, in World War II. It was early in the game, but it could have been that one of the reasons Alex come with us was, again, to explore broadening our product line. But we never took that seriously.
Hunter Airport, did you ever have the occasion to fly in and out of the old Hunter Airport here at Cedar Rapids?
Once or twice, yeah.
Did you ever know Dan Hunter, the owner?
No.
How about your social life? I know you were very committed to your job for so many years, but surely you took time to have fun once in a while.
Oh, sure. It started out, I think, when we were hired. I think in 1941, when we started work, there was 14 engineers that were brought in into a small company that was in considerable expansion. Most of us were single. Most of us, we were all broke. And we got to know each other quite well. And Al Morgan Kraft was the chief engineer, and he'd been out and interviewed us and brought us in.
John, tell us who these gentlemen are in this photograph you have here.
Well, Bob Cox is here, and Kenny Klippel is here, Ernie Pappenfuss is here, Bill Roothouse is here, and Bob Gates. And we had a mutual interest in boating, and Kenny Klippel organized this one afternoon. And he made sure we all had the appropriate clothes, and we all met down at Carlville and took a picture sitting on my Ford.
Who had the boat, or was it at a joint venture?
Oh, we had several boats. Yeah, we had. I had a Lumacraft, and Coxie had a sailboat, I think.
What position would you and Robert held at that when this picture was taken? Would you have been directors at that time, or?
I think I was in operations at that time, yeah. Mhm. But it's of interest to me anyhow, that of all these folks, only Bob Cox and I are still around. And he's living in Kansas City. I had a long discussion with him yesterday on the telephone. We keep track of each other, and his wife was complaining they had 17 for Thanksgiving dinner.
Put it down. You can put it down.
Oh, okay.
John, sometime throughout your career, I forgot to mention, or forgot to ask you when you were married, and who the lucky lady was. What year did you get married? You remember?
1942.
1942. Was it to a local girl? Or?
Well, she was living in Cedar Rapids, but her home was in Pomeroy, Iowa, which is 600 people up in northern part of the state. And she'd been drifting around trying to find a job, and she'd found one in Cedar Rapids. But I met her in church, and we got married in 42. And
What was her name?
Alice Schmidt.
Alice Schmidt.
Mm-hmm.
Did she work? Did she have a job here in Cedar
Yes,
Rapids?
she worked.
How did you happen to meet?
We met at church, and she worked for the Iowa Mutual Insurance Company.
Did you have any children, John?
We had one daughter.
Her name is
Sarah.
Sarah. I think you have a photograph of her there. You might as well show it.
Well, this is a picture of Alice and Sarah, and about, Sarah must have been 8 or 9 years old. We lived in Cedar Rapids our whole life, until she graduated from college.
You had another very nice picture of the three of you sitting out in front of the house there.
When I retired, we lived in Cedar Rapids on Valley Brook Drive, and my wife liked to garden, and all we had was hickory trees, walnut trees. So we bought some land out in the country and built a new home and moved out there. And this picture here was taken shortly after I retired, I believe. We built this house, and Alice and Sarah and I, and my dog Buffy.
Very nice. John, I know you worked with a lot of people throughout your lifetime at Collins Radio. I got some names here that I think you touched on some of these. Arthur Collins, your relationship with him. Robert Cox, you want to touch on him?
Well, Bob and I, as I mentioned earlier, started work on the same day. And he went strictly to engineering, and I went out to the factory. But Bob was a member of the engineering department and worked closely with Mr. Collins his whole career here. And we got to be close personal friends. He was from Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, I believe. And Bob went to the University of Michigan, and he got his master's degree at Rensselaer, which is on the East Coast someplace. and we were just plain close friends. He was a real addition to the Collins Company, in my judgment.
John Dayhoff?
Well, I told you about Dayoff and my experience with him on getting parts and getting help out of him. But, Slim and I grew into be real good friends. We hunted together, we fished together, we played golf together, and he was part of the Collins Farms Company in the beginning. But he could manage something quite well. And he had the ability to pick good people to work with him. And we had lots of fun together.
What would he have done, what type of work would he have done working for Art's dad?
I think he repaired machinery for the farms. Because his father was a big farm operator, and farm equipment, as it is today, needs a lot of maintenance.
Ernie?
Pappenfuss. Well, Ernie come to us from Minnesota, and he had a sense of humor that just wouldn't quit. But Ernie and I had an interesting time here. When Arthur come into me one day and said, "John, the personnel department doesn't know how to evaluate a good engineer as he graduates from university. So I want you and Ernie to take over recruiting engineers as an addition to your present assignment." So we did that. And what we did, among other things, is that we took trips to the Big Ten universities, not all of them, but good ones close to us for engineers. When we were not recruiting, we went down and got acquainted with the professors. We took them to dinner, and we got just plain well acquainted with them. This happened at Purdue, at Illinois, and Minnesota, and several other the principal schools in the area that had at that time a good reputation for solid electrical engineering programs that were in communications. So Ernie and I went out and hired engineers, and I don't know if we had the authority, but we took it. If we found a real good one, and he was a good commodity, and we could hire him on the spot, I did. We didn't let him get away. But Ernie, in his book that he wrote about the amateur radio, suggested that between the two of us, we hired 400 engineers over a number of years. And but Arthur didn't want engineers selected just by looking at their itinerary or their what they had done, so forth. He wanted us to ask them questions and get a good feel of it. And we got some good ones. But the professors helped us. They got to know us. We had them invited out here. We took them to the plant. And they understood that. And so Ernie and I had quite an experience with that. And it was fun.
Yeah. Ted Hunter?
Well, Ted was a professor down there at Iowa. And he was assigned the variable tuned oscillator in the ART-13. And it was a challenge. And he had a variable pitch coil that he was tuning. And he'd tell me how many turns at this pitch and so many at that pitch, and I'd make it right like it was supposed to be. And it was still not linear. It had to be linear. And he come to work one morning and he said, "John, I figured it out." He drove from Iowa City. He says, "I'm going to put a bunch of little washers," I called them, and we're going to adjust those to make it work. And it did. But right after the war was over, he went back to university. But he was a wonderful guy to work with, both personally and technically.
And I know what, from where you speak, because I remember building those oscillators, and you had to use a certain amount of washers, or shims they call them, to make them tune.
They were oval.
Yes.
Yeah, I always called them washers. They
Wave.
make Ted mad.
Wave washers, they
Yeah.
called them wave washers, yeah.
That occurred to him one morning as he drove up from Iowa City that we'd try that, and it worked.
Yes, it did. Shorty Harrison.
Well, Shorty Harrison was a very interesting guy. He's not an engineer. He started with us as a farm boy from Missouri that come up to Cedar Rapids, Iowa, looking for a job, and he got one as an assembly operator, I believe. A very bright, hard-working young guy. And he worked his way through the operations out there. And then when they come to build the final radio, the ART-13 models, why, he put it together. He was in charge of that operation, and he did it. And he was saying here just a few weeks ago, he said, you know, I had that thing all together, and we're going to turn it on. And Arthur come in and looked at it, turned it on, tuned it up, tested the power, and he said, we're going to build it. Shorty, go out and show him how.
And Shorty went on to become, I remember one time he headed up the ham radio up in Anamosa, Iowa.
He run the Anamosa operation, and then I think his last assignment was a senior member of the quality control department, all the way across the board.
Winnie Helm.
Well, Winnie was a foreman. If you folks remember her or not, she was
Yes.
a tall, good-looking young lady with red hair. And on my daily tour through the factory, and I used to budget my time. I have an hour a day to walk through the plant. And she stopped me and she said, John, there's not enough margin in this radio set. We can't get him through consistently. And she said, I just can't get any help. Can you help me? And I said, Winnie, I can't fix it, but I'll talk to Ernie. So I stopped by Ernie's office and told him what the problem was. He says, I'll look into it. Well, I come by the next day, and Winnie was there with a smile on her face as big as all out of doors, and she said, boy, it's fixed. I said, what'd they do? She said, I don't know. But she said, those two guys over there come out yesterday afternoon, they haven't been home yet. We fixed it. But she was a very good supervisor. And I believe she's still around.
Yes, I see her at church every once in a while. I had the pleasure of working, my desk was right beside Winnie. I had the planar portion of her assembly line, and so we got to know each other quite well. And she was probably quite proud that she got Mr. Nyquist to straighten her problem out.
Oh, I don't know about that.
She was a very, very
All she wanted to do was get those radios out of here.
John, I know throughout your career there is a lot of very stressful times. When thinking back, what do you suppose the most enjoyable period of your career was that you?
I enjoyed every assignment I had. I was dedicated to this high technology, reliable thing. We had problems with it, but by and large, I thoroughly enjoyed my career with the Collins Company. And a good part of that is we had a fine staff to work with. And Cedar Rapids was a good town to run it. But we had troubles, sure. I had a union strike once. I didn't enjoy that at the moment, but we settled it and got along.
What year did you retire?
72.
72.
Mm-hmm.
1972, computers as we know them today,
They're still in development.
still in development. Yeah. Do you have your computer of your own nowadays?
Oh, sure, yeah.
And do you think, do you ever think of how it could have helped you in your job? at
Well,
college?
sure, well, I don't think about that as an issue really, but when I first was involved with the factory a little bit, we didn't have a data system. We had a folder, as Arthur called it, that had all the drawings and all the parts that went to build this radio set. But between folders, we'd have the same parts with different part numbers. And Arthur was going to fix that, and he did. But boy, we had a problem. I remember that was the first I got exposed to the digital and the computer operation, day-to-day basis.
I can remember when we went into computer production out there where the computers would be rack after rack after rack. They would probably fill the length of this room, and now you can hold them on your lap. And
Yep.
if you had to do it over again, John, would you chose any other walk of life, or wished you would have experienced any other things in your life that you didn't get a chance to do?
No, I don't think so. I have a feeling of accomplishment, and I have a feeling I completely enjoyed it. What more could you ask for?
That's it. How about your daughter Sarah? Where is she living now?
She's living in Scottsdale,
In Arizona.
Scott, in Arizona.
Good place to go in the winter.
We're going down the 17th of December.
After you retired, John, what did you, when you first retired or prior to retiring, did you have any thoughts in mind what you'd like to do after you did retire?
Well, we built that new home out in the country. And I like to keep busy. I got a big yard, a long driveway, and I worked around the farm a lot and enjoyed it.
Is it an acreage you like, or?
Well, I bought 80 acres because I couldn't find 10. But my lot must be 4 or 5. And I enjoy working with my hands. I have a complete workshop, a woodworking shop in the basement. And that stands idle all summer, but it's getting warmed up now. I like to work with my hands. It's fun.
Did you ever have an interest in traveling after you retired?
Well, yes. I traveled quite a bit in my work. But Alice and I took an international trip once a year for 20 years. So we've been there.
Could you tell us some of the countries you visited?
Yes, I can think about that a little bit. We started out by going to South America and spent some time in Rio. We went to Germany, Sweden, almost all of the countries in Northern Europe. We got down to Italy once in a while, that kind of thing. Been to the Orient, Japan, China. Been to Alaska, throughout the United States. We just took a trip this last summer to Scotland. We'd been to England and Scotland and those places, but I'd never been to northern Scotland. And so we did that this summer. But, looking back, Alice was saying the other day, 20 years and a different one every year.
John, unless you have anything else you want to mention, we'll draw this interview to a close. The Cedar Rapids Historical Society, the Linn County History Society would like to thank you very much for sharing your memories with us. It's been very enjoyable talking with you.
Well, I thank you for your interest in the Collins Company. we had fun, and we built, in my judgment, the best communications country, best company in the United States, if not the world.
Thank you, John.
Okay? Well, thank you.